Scary Stories. This one is titled Lights On. Please turn off the lights. The odd request from my 7-year-old made me halt on the doorway. She had always asked to sleep with the lights on since she was 4, so hearing that baffled me. Stories about monsters would leave her frantic mouth as she begged me to leave the lights on back then, so I was truly taken aback. Do you want me to leave the door ajar at least? I asked in return, still in confusion as I waited for her response. I added that I would leave the hallway lit so she could have a sliver of light, but she insisted on being in the dark. Whatever questions I had, I decided to bury them for the meantime and resorted to bidding her a good night before I closed the door shut. Every night after telling her that I loved her, she'd always remind me to flick the switch down. I'd give her one last smile before losing her completely in the atmosphere of ebony. What had started out as a want for darkness during her bedtimes had crawled even on our moments on the couch together. Please turn the lights off. I'd look at her with a raised brow as she bent her head down while the television blared in the background. Even after submitting to her request, I still noticed how she never truly watched the program as her eyes remained on the corner where no light shone. I left it alone at first as she was never a problem child, but when she asked to dine in the dark, that was when I had to draw the line. You know I can't do that. My concern must have won over my sternness as her teary eyes met mine at the dining table. I expected her to protest, but all I got were sniffles as she ate her meal with her eyes no longer seeing mine. Sleep abandoned me that very night, so I decided to check in on her and found her still very much awake. I dismissed whatever apologies she was about to say and relayed on my own. I am truly sorry for reacting like that. Can I please know why you've been acting this way? Even in the blackness of the room, I can still see the illumination of her tears, and it broke my heart even more. She said, "Remember about the monsters? The reason why I always wanted to sleep with the lights on?" I hummed a simple yes, and what she confessed next turned my concern into dread, because all this time I thought she was just being brave. She said, "They're much scarier in the light," and I couldn't take it anymore. Alright guys, thank you so much for listening. If you want me to read your scary stories, please submit them to submitastorytime@gmail.com. Happy spooky season. When I was 10 years old, my grandfather passed away, leaving the old family home to my mother. It's one of those old Victorian homes that's been in the family for well over 100 years. The house came with a plot of land in the back that at that point was basically a forest of trees. Me being a 10-year-old with a huge imagination, I decided it'd be the best place to go exploring. As I was exploring, I ran into another girl. I said hello and asked her name and if she lived around there. She said her name was Kay, and she said her house was close to here. This made me happy to have another kid my age to play with. I asked her if she wanted to play. She agreed. From then on, for a whole year, Kay and I were best friends and played together after school and on weekends. The only problem was Kay only wanted to play in the forest and wouldn't go anywhere else. But again, I was happy to just have a friend, so I didn't even question it. But then my other grandfather got sick and was given less than a year to live. Our family moved back to be with him for his final days. He actually ended up living for another year before we lost him. After a while, my parents and I moved back home, but when I got back, Kay never came over. Days went by and then weeks and months and still no Kay. Eventually I moved on, figuring she moved away. It wasn't until 15 years later I realized who Kay really was. My parents decided to move into a retirement community and left the house to me and my fiance. About a week into moving in, I was going through some old family photos when I got to a picture of my mother, my grandfather, my grandmother, and another girl. But not just any girl, it was Kay. I was sure of it. I was completely freaked out. I took the photo to my mother and asked her to explain, without mentioning that she looked like my old friend. My mother sighed and said she never wanted me to know, but our family had a dark past. The girl in the photo was Catherine, my mother's sister, who had went missing when she was 10. No sign of her had ever been found, even now over 20 years later. It was suspected that a family member who unalived themselves not long after her disappearance was at fault. This effed with me for a while, but I tried my best to move on. But then we had the wildfires that burned down most of the forest in our backyard. Thankfully, our house had minimum damages, but forest was toast, literally. We decided to clear out the land, which resulted in a terrifying find. While digging up one of the tree trunks, one of the workers found bones, human bones. The police were called and they did their police stuff and determined that the body found belonged to Catherine. They determined she died not after she went missing. Is this why Kay only wanted to play in the trees? Could she not leave, or did she want me to find her body? And if so, why didn't she tell me? Thank you so much for tuning in to this scary story. If you would like me to read your scary stories, please submit them to submitastorytime@gmail.com. Happy spooky season.
I anonymously reported my dad for a 35-year-old unsolved murder. My dad is a fuck. He abused my mom for 20 years and abused me as a kid. There's a lot of detail I don't feel like going into because I dealt with it all day yesterday and I'm exhausted. I haven't talked to him in almost a year. Yesterday, I wrote him an email explaining all the bullshit he put me through as a kid, and that if he ever wants a chance at a relationship with me, he needs to go to therapy. I told my mom about it after I sent it, and I guess it triggered something in her. She started crying and telling me about the things he'd done that she had never mentioned before, stuff from when they were teens. She told me through tears and pain about how she'd had this unsolved murder from their hometown on her mind lately. My parents and their siblings were friends with her. She went out for a run and disappeared. Won't go into detail about the location and shit, but my dad and his brother, who was also a fuck, weren't seen all day on the day of her disappearance. They suddenly up and moved states not long after. My mom told me she always had a terrible feeling about it, but was too scared to prod. She just repressed it, like with all the other fuck shit my dad did to her and to others throughout the years. So, fuck it. I sent an anonymous tip to the PD of that town. I told him what she told me, said these guys are in my family and both have a history of nefarious shit. I told them I think they should be reinvestigated with updated forensics since I'm sure DNA has come far in the last 35 years. If they didn't do it, they'll be fine. A little scared and inconvenienced by an interview for a 35-year-old murder, but ultimately fine. If they did do it, fuck them. He spent his entire life avoiding the consequences of his fucked up actions. If he's a murderer, he deserves to have the consequences of that brought down on him hard. Plus, the family of that poor girl deserves closure. Her mom has now passed and will never know the truth. The rest of her family deserves better. I'll be happy if they get it. Today I fucked up by sending nudes to my pastor. I was taking some steamy pictures of my girlfriend. With her permission, I sent some pictures to a friend on Snapchat. I didn't pay attention and sent them all to a pastor who's married. To be fair, my friend and pastor have a very similar username. I didn't notice it at all for a while until I got a message from him. That went south as his wife was next to him when he opened them. He contacts me angrily stating that he's in trouble and why would I even send those types of pictures to him. He was asking me that if I have lusting issues and when would I be able to see him to take care of this issue. My girlfriend was so hard laughing as he was berating me on the phone. She even said let's send him more jokingly. I thought things were over after that night, but I was wrong. The pastor has told some people what I had done. Some were angry that I had done that. A few had asked if I was willing to share some of the photos I sent over. Lesson learned, pay attention who you forward your snaps to. Today I fucked up by helping a woman jumpstart her car. The other day I got home late at 11:30 p.m., exhausted after a work meeting, and I just couldn't find a parking spot near the building whatsoever. At some point after circling hopelessly around the building and at nearby streets, I saw a woman sitting in her car parked, and I couldn't tell whether she's about to leave or just got in. So I asked her, and she said, I need to go out, but I just can't start up my car. Would you please help me? So of course I said yes. I needed the parking spot, also why not be nice? She said that she had forgotten the light is on or something, and the battery died, so she needed a jump start. Now the problem was that the front of her car was not easily accessible since she parked between two other cars perpendicular to a wall, and the space between the cars and the wall was very narrow. I had an idea on my mind to have her put the car on neutral and let it slide backwards, but for some reason she managed to convince me that there's enough room for my car to go in the narrow space to get close to the front of her car and attach the jumper cables. So I was stupid enough to trust her, and she started instructing me how to go in. I just listened to her and did as she instructed. And she was like, go on, you have plenty of space. Needless to say, I ended up scratching the wall and leaving damage on my car and definitely couldn't reach her car. Since it was too dark and I was too exhausted, I couldn't tell how bad it was until the next morning. At the end, we reverted back to my method, pushed her car backwards, and blocked the one-lane street which made other drivers mad, and I helped her jumpstart the battery. She went off and I took the parking spot. Now I gotta fix up my car because I tried to help a stranger. But hey, I got the parking spot.
But as for yelling at my wife after she woke me up to help with the kids. My wife is a stay-at-home mom for our 2 kids. I really try to help with the kids when I get home, and I know being a stay-at-home mom is pretty tiring even though it is part-time off from school. When I get home, I make dinner and wash the dishes, and I stay with our kids for a while so she can have a moment too. These weeks have been pretty exhausting. And in November, there's a 6-month project that my team is presenting. Last week was the final touches, and I went to work at 8 a.m. and got home at 5 p.m., took care of the kids until 9, and was working again till 3 to 4 a.m. And I got maybe 3 to 4 hours of sleep. I also have trouble sleeping. I was exhausted and wasn't even driving because I didn't even trust myself to drive. I was dragged to the hospital after my coworker said I nearly passed out while walking, and the doctor demanded I take a week's medical leave. When I got home, I spoke to my wife and she seemed understanding. I asked just to give me a day off from everything. I even offered to give her a day off after because I knew that she was tired too. I went to sleep at 9 p.m. and woke up to her nudging me to take the kids to school. And she said, yeah, but this is your part of the morning. I have other morning plans. I told her about what the doctor said, and she still said that you're a father, tired or not. I just yelled at her that I need more sleep. She was upset that I yelled at her.